Shalom, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Giving honor unto the Most High, the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. My name is Yeshaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan of the nation of Israel. Now, brothers and sisters, this is in no way, shape, form, or fashion disrespect to anybody in what we're presenting and what we're going to be talking about. Recently, I have come to see that there was a debate or a discussion, if you will, based upon the disagreement of a matter and understanding certain things. And no one knows everything besides the Most High. What we will attempt to do in this short presentation is to sit there and explain upon the matter from a Hebraic stance, if we will. And brothers and sisters, I'm going to have to ask people to get your pens, your writing equipment, your paper, your pads, your parchment, your ink. I'm going to have to ask you to get your papyrus, your fingers, whatever you're using to write with and write on, your oat tag, your markers, because we're going to go over 12 slides. And the purpose in this is to show from a Hebraic and logical way, from a historical and reasonable way, that brothers and sisters, the definition of the word aniyah, its plural being aniyot. And brothers and sisters, as stated inside of the description of this presentation, we want to point out that we're going to go over a couple of words from the Hebraic way, from the Hebraic understanding in a particular manner. And again, as stated, this is not to say that everybody is either right or that everybody is either wrong. Nonetheless, brothers and sisters, we want to point out a particular matter for edification purposes. So, I have to ask without any further ado, brothers and sisters, I have to ask for those who are attending and listening, whether you may agree at first or disagree altogether. Brothers and sisters, what we are going to attempt to portray from a Hebraic way, from a lingual matter, and from a logical matter, the stance in which we are speaking on. All right? So let us, brothers and sisters, again, without any further ado, start. Let me enlarge that, sorry. We see here Deuteronomy 28:68. Shalom, giving honor to the Creator of heaven and earth. That is how we start, brothers and sisters. Not starting in insults, not starting in profanity, not starting in a way in which we find ourselves having to later on say, Salika, Salakli, Shagaga, Ra'i meaning like my evil or my bad, if we will. All right. So let us go on. Deuteronomy 28, and 3 words to explain. Weh'heh'sheeb'ka, Yah, Meetz'ry'yeem, Ba'aniyot, Baderek, Asher, Amarti, Laka, Lo, Tosif, Od, Lir Ota, Wehit Makara Tim, Sham, Lo Oibeka, La Abadim, Walish Pachot, Wa'ain, Quone. Now, brothers and sisters, if I can be heard, let me get a 1, please. If I can be heard, brothers and sisters, from those who are in attendance, can you press 1? Thank you. Much greatly appreciated. Thank you for typing in the 1. Brothers and sisters, we want to, in due respect, as pointed out, go over 3 words. And let us look at this, and we're going to color code this. Weh'heh'sheeb'ka. Right? Make that bold and color code this one in this way. And brothers and sisters, this word spells weh'heh'sheeb'ka. Now, the ka at the end is a suffix, and the weh in the beginning is a prefix. Heshib, brothers and sisters, is the word that we want to focus on in this particular case. And we're going to color code that part red, if we will. Now, what are we looking at? The word heshib, brothers and sisters, in the verbs of Hebrew, it falls under what is referred to as a he-filled verb stem. The he-filled verb stem is the 5th, sometimes treated as the 7th of the 7 verb stems, because you have 7 verb stems in basic Hebrew: the qual, the nif'al, the pl, the pu'al, the he-filled, the hofal, and the he-pa'el. In many cases, the he-filled is the causative of the qual being referred to in many cases as the simple active. So what is the qual stem of the he-filled word? Heshib is the word shab. So let's look at that real quick, if we will. The word shab, brothers and sisters, in Hebrew means to return. So now that, brothers and sisters, we want to point this out, if we will, right? The word shab is a ayin waw verb. What is an ayin waw verb? An ayin waw verb is any verb, brothers and sisters, that has a waw as the second in its root letter. When you conjugate that in the past tense, the waw drops off. So you would not say shawabti or shawabta. You would say shabti or shabta. This waw, brothers and sisters, comes back inside of the future tense. When you have ashub, which means I will return. Ashub ha'iparon, I will return the pencil. Ashub hakesef, I will return the money. So, brothers and sisters, these are things we just want to point out for edification purposes, if we will. Shalom to Lazette Temple. Shalom to Making King 4. Shalom to Dorayu Ben Dora. Now, we've gone over this word heshib and discussing this verse in the past. And I cited something in the book of Samuel that speaks about David and Nabal. and how David said the Most High caused to return upon the Baal's head what he's done to his people. And the root word that's used there is the word weh'heh'sheeb. Now, let's look at this word here, Meetz'ry'yeem. We're going to talk about this a little while, or should I say throughout this, right? This word spells Meetz'ry'yeem. Meetz'ry'yeem, by many, says is Egypt. It means Egypt. But as we pointed out in many cases, linguistically, there's no way that you're going to say that Meetz'ry'yeem means Egypt. Spiritually, yeah. Geographically, perhaps. Culture-wise, maybe not so per se. Because Meetz'ry'yeem, generally understood to mean Egypt, is what the Israelites called that particular land. The people who were called the Meetz'ry'yeem or the Egyptians did not call themselves Meetz'ry'yeem or Egyptians. Those particular people had their own name for their own country and their own culture. They refer to it as Tamehu and Tameri. Generally understood today like as Upper and Lower Egypt. All right? So that's something we want to point out. They refer to their own places such as Waset, which ancient Israel referred to as the land of No, which the Greeks called Thebes. What the Israelites referred to as On, the Egyptians referred to as Ayunu, which the Greeks later on called Heliopolis. What, brothers and sisters, the Israelites referred to as Nof, the Egyptians called Menofer, which the Greeks later on called Memphis. So why do we go over that? Is because one people can call a land or a people a name that those people do not refer to themselves nor to their land as. And that has to be understood. You have to understand the culture and the reasoning of a people behind naming something. Once that part is not understood, and everyone is going around perhaps saying Meetz'ry'yeem means Egypt, how do you get the ayim in Hebrew, but you don't see nothing doubled inside of the word Egypt? Because in Hebraic thoughts, you have, for instance, the word for sock that you put in your feet. S-O-C-K. In Hebrew, it's called the word garab. Socks in Hebrew is referred to as gerabayim because most people wear two socks. So the ayim in Hebrew shows a dual in the pluralization of such. When Joseph had his son Ephraim, it comes from the root word para, which means to be fruitful. Ephra means I will be fruitful. Ephraim, that ayim is that dual plural, being that Ephraim is the second born of Joseph. So my point, brothers and sisters, in going over that, all of those different things has to be noted and understood in order to understand where the people's mind is coming from and thus where they're going. Solomon spoke upon the matter in saying, in all you're getting, get understanding. So let us go on in this particular matter. Aniyot. This word spells Aniyot. Now, some people would say Aniyoth, because some people say that the last letter you see there as a tau is truly pronounced as a TH. You find Israelite brothers and sisters saying that. That's not the main point in this particular case. What we want to talk about is the meaning of the word Aniyah and Aniyot. One of the things we know offhand is that it appears to be a feminine plural. Why do we want to point that out? Because if, for instance, the word Aniyah means ship, S-H-I-P, we already see that is already feminine. Because anything in Hebraic thought that you go into is treated in the feminine. You understand? So now when you have, for instance, the word aniyah, it's plural following the same pattern of feminine pluralization. You would have it said as aniyot. So let's go on, if you will, in this particular case and get back. Let's look at this. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 9. Surely the owl shall wait for me in the ships of Tarshish first, to bring thy sons from far, their silver and their gold with them, for the name of the Lord thy God, and for the Holy One of Israel, because he hath glorified thee. Now, what can we, brothers and sisters, gather from that? Let's look, if we will. Pardon for drinking. Kili iyim yekwawu wa aniyot Tarshish barishona lahabi banayik merakok kaspam uz habam itam l'shem ya Elohayik walikdosh Yisrael ki pe arak. Now, let's highlight some things here, if we will. In the ships of Tarshish first, bold. And here we see Wa'aniyot Tarshish Birashona, bold. This is in Isaiah chapter 60, and we're going to show how important noting Isaiah 60 is in relation with Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, as we go along. So remember this, please. We see here the word, and we want to color code this, if we will. All right. Let's color code that mustard yellow. And here we see ships of. And we're going to color code that, if we will, right? Mustard yellow. And if we will, behind it, we want to show, brothers and sisters, this in black, so it can, for instance, stand out, if we will. Now, what do we want to point out in this? Aniyot, translated here in Isaiah chapter 60, is the word ships of. So the thought in the teaching that says the word aniyot means mourning or wailing or lamentations and does not mean ship will read as this: surely the owl shall wait for me and the lamentations of Tarshish first, to bring thy sons from far. So how can somebody translate the word aniyot as lamentations or mourning and not the word ship? Because how then are they going to bring anything in the matter of mourning? Wouldn't you bring people, if anything, by ships more so than by lamentations? So in this particular case, let's point out the word for bring. This, brothers and sisters, in Hebrew, we want to bold type that, if we will, and we want to color code this one red. And while color coding it red, we want to backdrop that, if I'm using the right term for that, in the gray so it can stand out. Lahabi, to bring. That, brothers and sisters, in Hebrew comes from the root word hebi, which means en route to bring. So remember a little while ago, we spoke about the qual stem, and we spoke about the hifil stem. In this is side matter is, brothers and sisters, the hifil stem. Remember we said that the hifil stem in Hebrew, brothers and sisters, generally serves as the causative of the qual. Now, why do I go qual? Prefixes, suffixes, hifil, because many do teach on the fake book community that the, quote, black Hebrew Israelites don't know Hebrew. I have conversed with people who have actually tried to point out or say the people who call themselves the Israelites or Hebrew Israelites, which they want to use the colloquial term black Hebrew Israelites, supposedly on an online so-called moray, don't know how to teach Hebrew. Don't know Hebrew, don't speak Hebrew, don't teach his daughter Hebrew. So therefore, hold on, we got to sit back and understand, first, you don't know every Israelite on this earth. Back in the 1990s, they estimated that there was about, this before the internet world, mind you, that there was about 30,000 people of color proclaiming themselves as Israelites in the United States. in the 1990s. There's obviously more now. If you don't know all of the said Israelites, you should never fix your mouth online, or you should not type with your fingers online to say that, quote, the black Hebrew Israelites don't know Hebrew. There was a guy that said something like that. His name is Rabbi Meza. You understand? And the type of thing that guy Meza was attempting to portray, I did a video on it, by the way, and I can put it in the description, is that regarding the Israelites, you know, and if these guys really knew Hebrew, see what you should have done, and I say this and not to blow up nobody's name or offend anybody, what you should have done is what that guy did before they went against GOCC in Hebrew. See, that guy whose last name is White that went against the leaders in GOCC, they studied online to see who knew Hebrew among the, quote, black Hebrew Israelites and who didn't. So he picked who they figured wouldn't know how to defend himself or herself within the language. They did due diligence in studying before that guy went on that debate. And he picked that particular matter. Israelites have been telling Israelites who speak what they refer to as Lashon Kwadash, that Lashon Kwadash is not a language. We've been stating that for decades. Before you went against somebody in academia with a college matter, you should have listened maybe to the brothers that had love and respect for you, to know what is the prefix and the suffix, to know what is the bakalam, to know what is a conjugated verb, and what is the irregular aspects of the ayin wow, the ayin, the lamed ayin, the pei nun, the pei aleph, and so forth and so on. What is, brothers and sisters, a wow consecutive in biblical Hebrew? These things, not perhaps understanding biblical Hebrew, but looking at Hebrew with an English mind, you saw what happened with that debate with the Rabbi White guy. So, brothers and sisters, again, no offense intended to anybody, but you cannot say with a blanket statement that, quote, who you call black, we don't call ourselves that, that's a byword, that the Hebrew Israelites or the Israelites don't know Hebrew. You should have never done that. Because somebody, I believe it's in the Proverbs, if I remember right, about people who talk certain things and his neighbor will come after him and search him out diligently. So let's go on in this particular case. Now, this word lahabi in the hefil stem, right? It comes, brothers and sisters, from its qual stem being the word ba. The word ba in Hebrew means brothers and sisters to come. All right, so we're going to put this right here. Ba means to. Then we have, brothers and sisters, here, hey B, meaning to bring. So if you're translating the word aniyah and its plural being aniyot, not as the word ship or ships, and you're translating it as mourning, how can mourning bring anything first? So one then would ask, citing this important matter regarding Deuteronomy 28:68, because you got Christian apologists and black people into Christianity who try to sit there and come against the Israelites regarding this matter. You understand? You know? One second, please. So, brothers and sisters, sorry about that. I must have had to tend to something regarding a matter of close in love matter. Now, let's look at this right here. We want to point out that the word aniyot, translated here as ships of, is the correct translation. We're going to go over other examples. Judges chapter 5, verse 17. Gilead abode beyond the Jordan. And then, why does he sojourn by ships? Asher dwelleth at the shore of the sea and abideth by its bays. Now, let's look at this. Right? It says, and Dan, why does he sojourn by the ships? We want to bold that. And where does that say that in Hebrew? We want to bold that. Wadan, lama yagur aniyot. So do we notice something here? We see the word here, aniyot. In Isaiah chapter 60, verse 9. Right? And in here we see it, ships of. Then we see here, and then why does he sojourn by the ships? Lama, meaning why or for what? Right? Yagur aniyot. So now let's look. Yagur, brothers and sisters, we want to point this out. We already done bold parted. Gonna make that yellow, and we want to back the color it. No, we're gonna make that blue, and we want to back color it. Sorry about that. Yellow. Yagur is a verb. That Y sound in the beginning, remembering that Hebrew goes from right to left, right? Brothers and sisters, serves as the third person, masculine. In Hebrew, you know the root of a word is put inside the future tense by its prefix. And you know the past tense of a word by its suffix, for those familiar with the verbs and conjugation. Wadan, and Dan. Lama, why? Yagur, he dwells. Aniyot, he dwells by the ships. That becomes important later. This is part of the song of Deborah. Then it goes on, Asher dwelt by the shore of the sea and abided by his bays. It would not make sense in translation to have that word aniyot, which we're also going to show here, right? And we're looking at it from this point in red, and we're going to show it from this way as before in black. Now let's look. Let's look at this here. We see in Isaiah chapter 60, right? And we see in Deuteronomy 28, this same word here. Right? Color coding it in this case. And then we have here done in this manner. Now, why do we want to go into these particular, sorry about that, these particular ones in this particular manner as such as follows? First, not being in anybody's feelings, one should have never tried to say somebody didn't know any Hebrew. One, because you don't know everybody, so that statement should have never been stated. Secondly, when you are presenting your case, always be teachable and open to correction. Second or third, in this particular manner, let's think about that logically. The Most High will bring or cause to bring back Meetz'ry'yeem. Now, we've discussed this in books. We discussed this online. We discussed this in other matters, that Meetz'ry'yeem does not mean Egypt in that sense. If you look at it from the ancient Tamiri and the ancient Simatawi and so forth and so on. Went over that in books, went over that on lessons. What we want to focus on, nonetheless, though we discussed the word Meetz'ry'yeem, is this word aniyot. So let's go on and continue on in the language here. We see aniyot, ships and judges, ships in Isaiah 60. Let's remember Isaiah 60, all right? So in Deuteronomy 28. So let's look at this right here. Ezekiel 27, verse 25. Shalom, Queen, Sarah, Michaela, Yisrael of the tribe of Judah. Let's look at this here, Ezekiel 27, verse 25. The ships of Tarshish brought thee tribute for thy merchandise. Let's go in now. So wast thou replenished and made very heavy in the heart of the seas. So let's look at this. If we're going to say, as some may say or might have said, that that word oniyah or aniyah does not mean ship, in every translation in the Bible where they see ship in the Hebrew is aniyah or oniyah is a mistranslation. It should mean mourning. Then let's look at that and read it as such. The mourning, the lamentation, the sorrow of Tarshish brought thee tribute for thy merchandise. So wast is like the old English of was, thou replenished and made very heavy in the heart of the seas. See how that explanation makes no sense linguistically? So while people may have been trying to take shots or disrespect whom they call the black Hebrew Israelites, the breakdowns that you have, just dealing with Hebrew, not black, not white, not Judaic, not non-Messianic, not Messianic, not crossroads, not Talmudic, not even any of that. Just the language itself, that breakdown by saying that this word here in Ezekiel 27, and we're going to color code it if we will, this, and then show it in the back part in black. That breakdown, that explanation doesn't make any sense. To say that it means mourning, as in M-O-U-R, or see that? So if we were to say the lamentations of Tarshish brought thee tribute, that can't be it. Now, let's look at something we want to point out here, if we will. Right? And we're going to look at just this Aleph. And I remember asking, because a lot of people say that Aleph is a guttural and that Aleph is mute. How can it be a guttural, meaning from the back of your throat in pronunciation of something, if it's a mute letter? It's either guttural or mute. We got to come up with an understanding of which one it is, because we have already explained ayin is not truly a mute letter. Ayin actually does have a sound with it. But we wanted to color code this for a reason. You see that inside of the mustard yellow there, right? As a matter of fact, let's take this whole word here, right? Copy. Let's make a new slide, paste that, if we will. We're going to go back to this so we can get the whole word of it. Right? Copy. Go back here. Thank you for the time, brothers and sisters. Right? Okay, that part didn't work out for a brother. But all right, so what we're going to do, cut that part. Take this, cut, new slide, Go back here, right? Ezekiel 27, verse 25. The general teaching now is that you have aniyot as ships, and that is supposed to be incorrect. But brothers and sisters, such does not even make sense when you're trying to sit there and say about the ships and the seas, if you're saying that the word ships is a mistranslation. See, that's why it's important to study the matter. Let us look at this. Now, I want to address something that the brother Doriah said. That is crazy, because in place in which the word is found, it is never spelled with a hataf patah, but with a kataf kwamatz. Now, what you're dealing with kataf, patak, or kataf kwamatz, what would we say, brother, in a matter of when Israel was speaking? And I say this in no disrespect, because in Judges, you had the shebolet and the sebolet, because SH and S in many cases was interchangeable. You understand? So when we're looking at it, and I say this in no disrespect, that there were people in ancient Israel who did not know how to read. And we do know, though, that there were no written nikudot or vowels, that a vowel makes sound. Therefore, since a vowel makes sound, we already know that when speaking is done before reading. What happens with us is, because we're learning Hebrew from age 15 and older, we learn how to read first, then speak. But if you take the situation, brothers and sisters, with David, when he wrote the letter and gave it to Uriah for him to give it to Joab, David was speaking Hebrew before he wrote Hebrew. This is why in the beginning of this presentation, I was speaking upon it by saying, in all you're getting, get understanding. Because when you're speaking the language like David spoke the language, Solomon spoke the language, and there were those, say, in ancient Israel who were, no disrespect intended, illiterate, they didn't know how to read at all. So all of that has to be taken into understanding and into consideration. So no, you're not going to find that word, brothers and sisters, meaning mourning and lamentation, as if it does not mean ship. But let's continue on and show the examples. 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 27. And Hiram sent in the navy his servants, shipmen that had knowledge of the sea, with the servants of Solomon. So let us look at that, if we will, brothers and sisters. Vayishlach Hiram be'ani et abadal anshe aniyot What is this word here, ani, mean? It means, as translated here, navy. Now, we know good and well that navy deals with the sea. It says also in this part, anshe. This means men of. Aniyot, meaning ships. So in 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 27, we see the English saying here, shipmen. Anshe aniyot, the men of ships. Here in English say they're shipmen. See, that's why that portion is important in what we was talking about in this particular case. Let us go on and then show why we say what we're saying. This is called, brothers and sisters, already highlighted, right? Elul, which is one of the months. 5784. Deuteronomy 28, verse 58 to chapter 29, verse 5. Or Deuteronomy 28, verse 58 to Deuteronomy 29, verse 8. And its description is penalties for disobedience. Summary of wilderness journey. Then it says Isaiah 60, verse 1 to 22. Glories that divine favor will bring upon Israel. Let's go back to Isaiah chapter 60 and see what it says. Surely the owl shall wait for me, and the ships of Tarshish first, to bring thy sons from far, their silver and their gold with them, for the name of Yah thy power, and for the Holy One of Israel, because he hath glorified thee. So when we already read about ships in Isaiah chapter 60, verse 9, aniyot, seen there with the aleph, and if you want to go into the nikudot matter, you have the aspect of the shawah next to the kwamats, what they call a kataf kwamats, aniyot. Then you got the noon with the kirik, the yod, shown with the dagesh for many purposes. Within it, then you got the wa with the kolam, making an o sound because the hey drops out when you show the feminine plural. Then you got the ta at the end. But brothers and sisters, that's not how ancient Israel talked. They didn't say kirik yod mem. They spoke. So these are things we just want to point out for edification purposes. Now let's go on, if we will, back to what we were talking about here. Remember, we went over Deuteronomy 28, and then I mentioned the importance of Isaiah 60. Let's see why in part. And this is from Genesis, right? And it came to pass as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. While he bezait nafsha, ki meta, wa tikra shemo Ben-Oni, wa abiu kwara lo Ben-Yamin. Now, sorry, I didn't want to skip that part there. This is from Genesis chapter 35. When Rachel gave birth, she called his name as Ben-Oni, as we see right here. Bold type that. Ben-Oni means son of my sorrow. Now, she had passed away giving birth. So what can we also gather from this particular matter, if we will, brothers and sisters? The people named their children based upon events that were going on. All of the 12 tribes of Israel are named based upon events that were happening. So what do we want to point out is here, this word oni means my sorrow, from the word on or ona in many cases, meaning sorrow, lamentation, mourning, weeping. Obviously, his father didn't want his son's self-esteem to be known as that. So he changed it to Benyamin, means son of the right side. So brothers and sisters, context and understanding has to be noted in order when speaking upon these matters. When you are saying that you don't deal with translations when this matter is discussed about Deuteronomy 28 and whether or not the word translated as ship should be mourning or sorrow or lamentation, yes, you do deal with translations, unless you having your whole discussion in all Hebrew. Because if you use the Ben Yehuda dictionary, that's a translation. If you use the King James Bible, that's a translation. If you use the Masoretic text, that's a translation. If you deal with the Gideon's Bible, that's a translation. If you deal with the Stone edition of the Tanakh, that is a translation. So you can't speak in English about Hebrew. You can't be talking in English about Hebrew and then say at the same token that you don't deal in translations. Because if you're talking about Hebrew while speaking English, you're dealing in translation and in transliteration. What it is, you, and I'm speaking in general when I say that, feel that Deuteronomy 28:68 is not about the Atlantic slave trade. So to try to have to expound upon that understanding, you have to forget that Deuteronomy 28 verse 68 starts by saying, and the Lord. Let's stop there for a second. And A-N-D is called a conjunction. It causes two thoughts to come together. So you have to read before that to understand what is the thought pattern of what's being discussed. Verse 67 of Deuteronomy 28. In the morning you shall say you wish it was evening. And in the evening you shall say you wish it was morning. Deuteronomy 28, verse 66, verse 65, verse 64. All of that has to be noted because, see, once you get to Deuteronomy 28, verse 64, it already talks about the people being scattered. So you can't, as some have tried to in the past, go to Deuteronomy 28, verse 52 and say, all thy gates is in thy land, and then say who you call the, quote, black Hebrew Israelites are off. Because you're trying to say that Deuteronomy 28, verse 68 was culminated in the era of Titus, which, by misquoting Josephus, Josephus does not say that Titus, the Roman emperor, took Israelites by ships to Egypt from Israel, the land. What Josephus says in Wars of the Jews, brothers and sisters, what it says in there is that while the people were in Egypt, he took them by ship to Italy. That's what it says in Wars of the Jews in the book of Josephus, book 7. So, not being funny, I pointed all of that out in the book that I wrote on Deuteronomy 28, not playing salesman on the Shabbat. This has already been discussed by my teachers. Giving a shout out, because what got me into the spirit to even want to do this video, I want to give a shout out to the brother who I call a Moray, Avdiel Levy, also known as Zion Lex. Some people like what he says, some people don't like what he says, so be it. But I watched on his channel how he and another person, an excerpt from a video that was done earlier in the week. And in it, I was like, hold on. Not that the brother Zion Lex did not, quote, do his thing, as the saying goes. Not that he did not present what he was stating and why he was stating something. But brothers and sisters, the word aniyah, meaning ship, and the word aniyot, meaning ships, in many cases in the Bible, has something to do with the word yam in the same sentence. The word yam meaning sea or ocean, like the sea as in the water. You know, like on this channel, that my queen, the sister Sarah Michaela Israel of the house of Judah, when we was looking at the water in another state as the sun was setting, that kind of scenery, that's Yam. That's sea. So, brothers and sisters, let's go on, if we will. Now, let's say, for instance, that word oniyah means lamentation or mourning or sorrow, right? But at the same token, some are saying Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, as we pointed out in books and on this channel and in other cases, that it is in speaking about the Atlantic slave trade, right? Wouldn't they still be in mourning going through that? So what I did was, having read Alex Haley's book, Roots, and having watched the movie Imitation of Life, this is what I gathered. A movie that comes to mind is a movie I was forced to watch out of honor for my mother who made me watch it. The movie is called Imitation of Life. In that movie, the daughter did not acknowledge her mother due to her mother being black. The child was mixed. When the mother died and was led away, the daughter was crying, saying, "Mama, mama." Now, that's a movie that came out back in, like, if not the 60s, the 50s, right? And in Roots by Alex Haley, giving an account from what Alex Haley is talking about, it says this: Kunta wondered if he had gone mad, naked, chained, and shackled. He awoke on his back between two other men in a pitch darkness full of steamy heat and sickening stink, in a nightmarish bedlam of shrieking, weeping, praying, and vomiting. The girls were naked. Kunta could only avert his eyes. He had never seen a naked woman before. The men, also naked, sat with murderous hatred etched in their faces, grimly silent and crusted with blood from whip cuts. I've come to a belief. Now, this is a belief I want to state as such. You notice Israelites been talking about Deuteronomy 28, verse 68 is about the Atlantic slave trade. And have you noticed that people been saying the Atlantic slave trade, since we've been saying it's already prophesied in the Bible? Do you know that people been saying the Atlantic slave trade did not happen? The Atlantic slave trade is told in reverse. The Atlantic slave trade was not as large as some people say it is. Where were your communities at saying that before Crowdy in the 1800s was talking about Deuteronomy 28 as us? Where were your communities at before Rabbi Ford in Harlem and Rabbi Matthew was talking about those kind of matters? Where were your communities at when the Don Kohen Lewi and my other teacher, Mordeh Yosef, was talking about this in the 1960s? Where was your indigenous community at saying that the Atlantic slave trade was told in reverse when the black man, for whatever camp you came from, in Harlem and in Midtown Manhattan, was proclaiming we were the house of Judah? Where were y'all at then? Saying that, no, this is our land here. We didn't come off no ship, good ship Jesus or otherwise. And that 1619 is a myth, and Harriet Tubman is a myth, and Benjamin Franklin was a black man, and Lincoln was a black man, and George Washington was a black man. These are some of the ridiculous teachings that's now out. Lincoln was not a black man. Benjamin Franklin was not a black man. George Washington was not a black man. The maps are not told in reverse. Harriet Tubman looked, for those who do know, at the North Star and walked from the southern states to the northern states. So, brothers and sisters, these are things we want to point out for reasonable purposes. To try to come back against the, quote, black, who we call ourselves as Israelites, or some say Hebrew Israelites, the teaching prevailing in the YouTube community is we never came on ships, or there were not that many on ships. As if to say, it was only 500,000. only 500,000. Such was not the case. There were slave-holding houses, brothers and sisters, in Ghana from the 1600s. And they knew who they were taking in that ocean. So, if we wanted to say, as some do, that the word translated as Aniya or Aniyot, meaning ships, means mourning or lamentations, wouldn't the people in the ship still be lamenting and in mourning? See, you can't try to down something without understanding. Let's go on and close out. Alexander Falconbridge. Now, this was a person who spoke about the slave trade. First-hand account, if we will. Some wet and blowing weather, having occasion of portholes to be shut and grating covered, fluxes and fevers among the Negroes ensued. While they were in this situation, I frequently went down among them, till at length their rooms became so extremely hot as to only bearable for a very short time. But the excessive heat was not the only that was rendered their situation intolerable. The deck, that is the floor of their rooms, was so covered with the blood and mucus, which proceeded from them in consequence of the flux, that it resembled a slaughterhouse. Numbers of the slaves having fainted, they were carried upon deck, where of them died, and the rest were greatly difficult were restored. He made the most of his room, speaking of another account, and storing of slaves and wedged them in. They had not so much room as a man in his coffin. He took his shoes off. He took his shoes off so as to not to crush the slaves as he was forced to crawl over them. The slaves leaving marks on him from biting and pinching him. Many among the slaves were quarreled, was due to the fact that they were relieving themselves, trying to, when able to walk, to the latrines. Since many were shackled together, it made a quarrel between them. That's from an account by Alexander Falconbridge. You know why I cite that? Because the question came to me some years ago as to say, how can a ship carry millions of people? And I've been asking the said indigenous and autonomous community, what is your language? Why are you or seem to be set against us who saying we come from the lands of the East? Because we didn't come over here and make a treaty with you and break it if this is your land, my indigenous brother. Your argument against the said African American is not in the right place. That's how you know who controls who. You know how the people over in the reservations periodically go and protest, or they used to do it? You need to take your protest somewhere else because it's not against the said African American. It's not against the said Black American in America that says that we come from the lands of the East. Your argument has been displaced because your foundation was not about what is your land, your language, and your culture. It was what your language was not, your land is not, your culture is not. So when you find people perhaps saying the statement of, you know, believe nothing and question everything. If you believe nothing and question everything, when do you come to the truth? You like the dog chasing his tail. The difference is this. When one says he or she is an Israelite, they're saying that land in the East is ours. Our culture is the Torah and our language is the Hebrew. And to the people who say we are all Africa and the Black Hebrew Israelites, as they want to call us, are off. But you showing maps saying that the Middle East, as it's called, is truly part of Africa. And that a guy named General Mahan in the year 1902 coined the term the Middle East. And that Egypt and the Sinai and the Levant is all part of Africa. Well, to that I ask now, as I asked before, if that is the case, my continental African brother, below and north of the Sahara, if Israel, the land, is part of Africa, and you're telling me I'm an African, then isn't the land of Israel mine just as much as Tanzania, Botswana, Mozambique, and Madagascar, South Africa, and Angola is? If it's all one landmass, and the Middle East is truly part of Africa, as said by the conscious community, why are you going against the Israelites when we say Israel, what you say by default is part of Africa, is ours? Tell you why. Because tonight you can't do what you want to do because it's the Shabbat. That's why. Because you got laws, statutes, and commandments. See, when you're just an African, you have no laws, statutes, and commandments you got to abide by weekly, daily, hourly, yearly. You can give something to your brother monetarily or otherwise with a stink attitude. In Israel, you can't do that. It says you shall lend to your brother according to his need. So if you're lending to your brother according to his need, it says neither shall it trouble you to help your brother. In other words, help your people. See, when you say we are indigenous, you don't have to sit there and abide by those laws. That's the issue. You don't want to keep the commandments. Not that Israelites are perfect, because they're just some sinful Israelites in this earth. You understand? But when you're dealing with something that identifies you as a land, language, and culture, and character, that character part is the part that our people don't want to have to adhere to in many cases. You understand? So let's go on with this. From the book, Israelite History as it relates to the world. Again, that's a book that I wrote, not playing salesman on the Shabbat. It says this. A lot of niggas in slavery time worked so hard. They said they hated to see the sun rise in the morning. Slavery was a bad thing because some white folks didn't treat their niggas right. This is from a testimony of Rhea Sorrell from North Carolina. It says that they hated to see the sunrise in the morning and that slavery was a bad thing. Now, let's see something about Deuteronomy 28. In the morning thou shalt say, what God it were even, and that evening thou shalt say, what God it were morning. For the fear of thine heart which with thou shalt fear, and for the sight of thine eyes which thou shalt see. Deuteronomy 28, verse 68. According to Rhea Sorrell, a former slave in North Carolina, it says that they hated to see the sun in the morning. Let's go on. My mammy, Junie, was a queen in Africa. They kidnaps her and steals her away from her throne and fetches her here to Wake County in slavery. Slave testimony of Ann Parker from North Carolina. Our great-grandmother was named Granny Flora. They stole her from Africa with the red pocket handkerchief. Old man John William, go my great-grandmother. Slave testimony of Hannah Crasson, a former slave in North Carolina. Speaking about clothes, I went as naked as your child till I was 14 years old. I was naked like that when my nature came to me, meaning when her uncleanness began to come. Moss Whitfield and Karen, but after that, Mammy told him that I had to have clothes. Slave testimony of Mady Curtis, a former slave in North Carolina. Those are excerpts from slave testimonies. Those are slave testimonies. It says you will serve your enemies in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. It distinctly says one person speaking about being as naked to the age of 14. And the other things we want to point out is the fact of where it distinctly talks about where they said they came from being kidnapped out of Africa. So when people try to be minimalists and speak of the Atlantic slave trade is told in reverse, then you need to, my indigenous brother, go to where your people was taken east and bring them back. You understand? So that's something we want to point out for edification purposes. All right? Let us continue and close out. Meetz'ry'yeem and Meetz'ry'yeem. Mem, Zade Resh Yod Mem. Lamentations chapter 1, verse 3. Judah is gone into exile because of affliction and because of great servitude. She dwelleth among the nations, she findeth no rest. All her pursuers overtook her within the straits. This word, straits, in Lamentations chapter 1, verse 3, is the same word that spells what's translated as Egypt. Meetz'ry'yeem and Meetz'ry'yeem from Mount Zer. We pointed this out on the channel in the past. So these are things we just want to go over for edification purposes. All right. So this concludes this presentation. The brother, the Rayahu Ben Dora, mentioned the Ben Yehuda dictionary, page 13. And in it, it says, ship or vessel, aniyah, lament. So, Dora Yohu, if I'm understanding you right, are you asking me that you don't see lamentations or laments and that ship or vessel is in its plural in the Ben Yehuda Hebrew dictionary, and the word lament said as aniyah is never shown in the plural? If I'm understanding your question right, my brother, let me know. The sister, my lady, Sarah Michaela of the house of Judah wrote, who would want to wake up to oppression? That's a very good question because nobody will want to wake up to that. And in many cases, our people chose death. Right. If I'm able to be shown where it says that for mournings or lamentations or so, then please feel free to contact me. My number, 908-587-4841. But I think that's what the brother was talking about, if I was right in saying that. Thank you for that. So, brothers and sisters, we've gone over this in the past. If there's any questions, please feel free to comment inside the comment section when this is posted. I'm going to leave my number, 908-587-4841. And brothers and sisters, subscribe to the channel if you care to. It will be appreciated. We're going to close out now. Shalom. Check the description when you can for the contact number and for the video link that I went into this even a little deeper historically regarding when Rabbi Meza, M-E-Z-A, did a thing against the said, quote, Black Hebrew Israelites. Because again, if you don't know everybody on this earth, please stop trying to say who doesn't know what. Don't do that. That's not a good thing. All right. I was asked, do I take calls on the Shabbat? Yes, I do. But if you're going to call me on WhatsApp, preferably. All right, because for me it's a little clearer to speak in that particular case. All right. I do take calls on the Shabbat. If I find that it's not of a nature of the scriptures or so, of course the conversation's ended. But yes, didn't want to be too long, but giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. Shalom.